Susan Penner has also been a city councilor, and so that's mostly where I saw her face, but didn't really know her. And then a number of years ago, she began working for Life Culture Canada. And well, how long ago was that meeting we had in Steinbach with the ministers invited? Probably within the last half year. Anyway, I attended that session where she explained what Life Culture was all about, and it was fantastic. Really, really encouraged. And the focus of Life Culture is to promote life in Canada. So I'm going to get Susan to come on up, and I'll quickly pray with you, and then we'll turn it over to you. Lord, I want to thank you for Susan and unique gifts and abilities that you've given her. I thank you for the passion that you've given her to promote life culture in Canada. And I pray, Lord, for her as she shares with us some of the challenging scenarios that we face in Canada, and also what we can do about it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here. And I just wanted to share a little bit about myself. I'm the Executive Director of Life Culture Canada, as Daryl mentioned. I'm also a Steinbach City Councillor, which has also opened doors in this area as well. In terms of Life Culture, just give you an idea what we do. Our organization does pro-life education, which is primarily what I do. I travel a lot and then speak about what I'll be speaking to here this morning, and educate people, because there's very little education about this topic in our country. We also support women who are in difficult situations. So that could look like providing rent for a few months, or giving diapers to help a mom with a baby, those types of things. So that just depends on every situation. Generation Life is what we do to focus on college age students. We have an 18-year-old girl, well, now she's 19, and she travels and she speaks on different college campuses about abortion, medical assistance, and dying, again, trying to educate people. And then Angel Baby is what we do to help women who've experienced pregnancy and infant loss, whether it's miscarriage, stillborn, or abortion, and, you know, really humanizing the grief that they're going through with the loss of a child. So that's kind of encapsulates what we do as an organization. Today, this is going to be the presentation framework that I follow. I'm first going to talk about abortion. Then we're going to move to medical assistance and dying, and then how we can support a culture of life. And then there'll be a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, make sure you jot them down, and then we can get to them at the end of the presentation. So how I got into this is, like, I've always personally been pro-life. I just believe it's what the Bible teaches. And I just really, you know, I've always valued life. And I got more involved in pro-life work in high school when a really good friend of mine became pregnant. So it was really unexpected, obviously, as she was a teenager. But how she was treated by the church, by the community, there was really some cognitive dissonance there for me. So on the one hand, as Christians, we were saying, you know, life has value. Let's support women who have pregnancies. But what I was seeing wasn't exactly reflected. Like, for example, she had to go in front of the church and apologize for getting pregnant. So I was like, this isn't how it should be. So I ended up volunteering at a pregnancy crisis center for a few years. Then I went to school and, you know, carried on with my life. And then about 5 years ago, a really good friend of mine had called me over, and she said, I just found out my dad had wanted me aborted. And the appointment had been made at Planned Parenthood. It was going to be $200. And just before the appointment, he ended up getting driving without a license ticket for $200, and they couldn't afford the abortion. And it just really resonated. Like, it was like that ticket was a matter of life and death in that situation. But what also really hit me is, like, what if she wasn't here? Who else should be here? Who else is missing? Who should be my friends? And it really impacted me again, and my fire for pro-life was reignited. And about 2.5 years ago, I became the executive director of Life Culture. The thing is, reducing the value of life just to the subjective choice is just a major ethical problem, right? The same baby in one woman's womb is just infinite value and just so cherished and wanted. And you could put that same baby in another woman's womb, and it's just doesn't have any value. So there's this real ethical dilemma. So you don't even need to be a Christian. I know we often view life as a Christian religious issue, but it really isn't. It can go just into, philosophy and ethics. It doesn't really make sense. So this is really why I do what I do. And I often don't use a lot of scripture or biblical references when I present on it, depending where I'm presenting, because I don't even think you need to make that case. So I think it's really important for Christians to be equipped, not just from, the faith side, which we are, but also a presentation like this also equips you in terms of being able to engage in a culture that doesn't necessarily share our faith. All right. So this presentation is going to equip, educate, and encourage you to speak for life. And so what I want to do today is I want to start off with talking about abortion by the numbers, just to give you a scope of what we're dealing with in Canada. So in Canada, there's 100,000 abortions that take place each year. That's according to the Guttmacher Institute. It's also StatsCan as well. Globally, according to the World Health Organization, 73 million abortions take place globally. Like, these are just staggering numbers when you think about it. In Canada, 37% of unplanned pregnancies end in abortion. This really gets me, because if we look into our family tree, if I even just look into my own family and extended family, there is a lot of unplanned pregnancies in that scenario. And I think, like, what if my cousins were missing? What if my aunts and uncles were missing? So it's like, being unplanned doesn't determine whether somebody has value or not. But as we see, if a baby's unplanned in Canada, 37% are aborted. Globally, 61%. 20% of all pregnancies in Canada end in abortion, and 29% globally end in abortion. So this is just a really big issue. And just to give you some perspective, abortion ends with 100,000 lives in Canada, cancer, 81,000 a year, and heart disease, 53,000 a year. So we spend so much money and energy trying to save the lives of people who are born, but at the same time, we're spending money trying to end the lives of people who are not born. For example, in Canada, budget 2021, and this is in addition to, the public health care that already provides abortion. So another 45 million per over 3 years was committed in 2021, and now in budget 2023, further $36 million. And then Canada also spends $700 million a year improving access to abortion overseas. So we're trying to save lives on the one hand, and yet we're trying to end lives on the other hand. Since abortion was legalized in 1969, 4 million babies have been aborted in Canada. Approximately 1 in 4 women have had an abortion by the age of 45. So that's huge numbers again. So we also have to be very, kind and diplomatic and loving when we talk about this issue, because we see people every day who've had abortions. We just don't know who they are. So we have to be careful there too. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. 1 in 5 pregnancies, again, end in abortion. But this isn't just an issue out there. This is also something that's happening in the church. This is an American study, because Canada collects very poor abortion stats, but this is an American study. There's similarities. It wouldn't be exactly the same, but it would be close. But 4 in 10 women who had an abortion attended church in the same month as their abortion. Only 7% have talked to somebody about it at church, and 52% of church-going women who've had an abortion say nobody in their church knows. So it's not just out in our culture. It's actually something we need to be concerned about within church walls. And if there's one thing I've noticed, actually, particularly since Roe v. Wade was overturned last year, that was a huge catalyst for us. Prior to that, it was really hard to speak to churches on this topic. Nobody really wanted to address it. When Roe v. Wade, that's almost a year ago, literally about 50 weeks ago, when it was overturned, I was getting inundated with calls from pastors, parents, like, what do we do? Because suddenly the congregations were asking questions about abortion, because it was so prominent in the news. And they were saying, like, we have staff who aren't pro-life, or, our youth are pro-choice. We don't know how to address this. So that has really opened the door for us to be able to come in and provide some education and help equip in this area. I think we're really floundering to defend life. And it really is, if you look at the numbers, it's like the greatest human rights issue of our time. And I think we often assume that Christians are quietly pro-life, churches don't talk about it. And there's studies that show like almost like 99% of people who go to church have never heard a sanctity of life message from the pulpit, right? So it's not being addressed in church, and yet we're expecting Christians are going to be quietly pro-life. Well, where are they hearing stuff from? Social media, celebrities, the culture. So what we're seeing is that Christians aren't actually quietly pro-life. They're quietly pro-choice, a lot of them. So that's something that we definitely need to address. So I'm just going to quickly go over how we got here, just a really brief, view from the Canadian history, how we got to this point. So abortion was legalized in 1969 by the Liberal government led by Pierre Elliott Trudeau. So at that time, it meant that a committee of doctors certified that continuing a pregnancy would endanger a woman's life or health. Then in the 1970s, this name may sound familiar to you, Dr. Henry Morgentaler started setting up abortion clinics, illegal abortion clinics in Quebec. So he set up these 3 clinics, and he set up a clinic and he kept performing abortions, and he was arrested 3 times, but he kept, doing them, and the government just basically stopped arresting him, and he carried on. In 1975, a petition of 1 million signatures, this is the largest in Canadian history, was presented to Parliament requesting protection for the value of life of the unborn. This is the biggest petition in history, and this wasn't done on computers, right? This is pre-computers, pre-online surveys. This is small pro-life groups and churches across the country literally getting signatures, compiling them, and bringing them to Parliament Hill. It was ignored. And you don't hear about this one in the history books either, but that is a pretty significant achievement. Then in 1988, the Supreme Court strikes down the existing abortion law as unconstitutional, saying it interferes with a person's charter right to life, liberty, and security of the person. Well, it's not considering that for the child inside the womb, but this is known as the Morgentaler decision. So the courts did not endorse that there should be no law. They just said a different law needed to be passed. So the Mulroney government made 2 attempts at this. In 1988, a law was presented to allow for early term abortions, but not late, but it did not pass because of opposition from both abortion advocates and pro-life advocates. So abortion advocates thought it was too restrictive. Pro-life advocates thought it was too loose. So it ended up not passing. So then in 1990, again, the Conservative government presented a bill to restrict abortion unless a physician found a pregnancy threatened a woman's physical, mental, or psychological health. So that bill passed the House of Commons, but it did not pass the Senate. And since then, there is no abortion law in Canada. And today, none of the parties in Canada, want to address it. And we are the only country in the Western world. Actually, we're the only country that doesn't have one in the Western world. And just to give you some perspective, this is all we know. So maybe we think this is normal. This is European abortion limits. Vast majority of them are 12 weeks. The UK at 24, Netherlands 22. So Canada is just a huge outlier in the Western world because we allow it for 9 months. All right. Now I want to move on to what is an abortion. So one of the challenges with abortion in our culture today is that there's a lack of education and information. So if I even look at my daughter is taking a class on sensitive issues in school. So they got this big packet on birth control methods, but there's nothing about human development, right? They just ignore the humanity. The humanity of the child is ignored. So courses, let's say on feminism, preach abortion as a pillar of equality for women. Again, not addressing the rights of the child in the womb. So we are told to blindly accept abortion, no questions asked. So we are left with a culture that supports abortion, but doesn't really know the full picture of what they're supporting. A recent survey by Angus Reid said in Canada, 52% of people are 100% pro-choice, 8% 100% pro-life, and then 41% in between. This looks really kind of bad, but actually this number is a lot lower than it used to be. Younger people coming up are not so quick to accept abortion. So this is actually, we're making some progress, but you can see there's a lot more that needs to be made. And then this number is interesting because there's a lot of people who do support limits on abortion, whether that be 12-week limits or in the cases of rape or whatever it is, but they're kind of homeless when it comes to this because they don't really fit. So this is an area that we really try and address. So I'm going to attempt to bring some clarity to what abortion is and how it impacts women. And I'm not going to show pictures or go into too much detail here, but I think it is important to have at least a general understanding of what's going on. So abortion is a procedure that intentionally terminates the life of the human embryo or fetus while in the womb. And intentionally is important because there's medical procedures that are used, if a baby has already passed in a miscarriage or stillborn, they may use, some of the same procedures, but that is not an abortion because the life has already passed. Abortion is intentionally ending the life of the woman or life of the baby in the woman's womb. So majority of abortions are done in the first trimester. Abortion pill is now just increasingly gaining in popularity, and that is 2 pills actually. The first pill depletes hormones in the uterine wall that provides safety and nutrition, and the second pill causes contractions, so the baby is expelled from the body. So this is really being framed as just this quick solution to an abortion. What's happening is women are often not even telling anybody they're pregnant. They're getting the pills, they're going home, and they're doing this by themselves, and is actually turning out to be hugely traumatic because this is about 8 weeks. So they're told it's just going to be like having a period. Don't worry about it. And all of a sudden they pass a tiny little baby and they're like, what are you talking about? It was supposed to be just tissue. So I'm increasingly seeing women who are really have a lot of post-traumatic abortion syndrome as a result of this because they're like, it was a little baby. But because they've learned nothing about it, they didn't really know. Vacuum aspiration is also in the first trimester. It's when the cervix is dilated and a hollow tube is inserted to suction out the baby. The force is so strong, it pulls the baby apart. Second semester, D&C is similar to the vacuum aspiration. But because the pregnancy is further along, a knife is used to cut up the umbilical cord and placenta, so it can also be suctioned out. D and E, this is of course now when the baby's getting bigger, the cervix is dilated and forceps are used to dismember the baby and pull the baby out literally piece by piece. So you're literally like ripping off an arm, ripping off a leg, and that's how the abortion is done. And then in the third trimester, there's an induction when the baby is injected with digoxin or potassium chloride to cause a heart attack. The mother is then induced and delivers a dead baby. The dead baby, if the baby is born alive, which does happen on occasion, it is usually left to die. So I venture to say that the 52% who are completely pro-choice, if they actually knew what happened to the baby during the procedure, they would be less inclined to support it. It is an incredible act of violence, but people literally do not know because they're never told. It's women's rights. Case closed. You might be interested to know that there are not too many doctors that are actually willing to perform abortions. So a few doctors do most of them. It's interesting. I had a doctor from Health Sciences Center just call me recently, and he was just talking about abortion and MAID. And he just said to me, Susan, support for these things in the healthcare system, like they're a mile wide, but they're an inch deep. He said, people in the medical profession, it's tough because they know this is life, and yet they kind of support it because they know it's political. It's kind of what they're supposed to do. But he said, if you push at all, you will find that most people in the medical system would not really support this. So regardless, there's no abortion law in Canada, so there's no limits on these procedures. Okay, so now I want to talk about the rationale for abortion. So I kind of based this on, again, after Roe v. Wade, there were so many arguments, so many things floating around like on social media and in the newspaper why, abortion should be legal. So I want to address some of those arguments just to really equip you guys. So 96% of biologists agree with that life begins at conception. This is science. Nobody's really debating this anymore. Okay. What's interesting about this, though, I often think of, if I think of like Psalm 139, He created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. Long before imaging technology and all this medical science, the Bible already said life has value in the womb. So science is really supporting what we already know from what the Bible says. So if 96% of biologists agree that life begins at conception, how is there so much support for abortion? Well, it gets down to something called personhood theory, which means a baby is a human, but not a person. So rather than denying that unborn children are humans, since that is scientific fact, pro-abortion advocates use personhood theory, which says that just because a fetus is human by virtue of his or her species does not make him or her a person. To be a person, we must have certain capacities, cognitive capacities specifically. The problem is when people start identifying these capacities, they realize newborn infants don't have them either, or people with mental disabilities, or people with dementia. So where do we draw or extend the line now? Who gets to decide whose lives are worthy of protection and whose aren't? So Princeton professor Peter Singer, he's like a world-renowned philosopher, hugely influential around the world. He says a week-old baby is not a rational and self-conscious being. And there are many non-human animals whose rationality, self-conscious awareness, capacity, and so on exceed that of a human baby, a week or a month old. The life of a newborn baby is of less value than that of a pig, a dog, or a chimpanzee. This is mainstream. So this guy goes around the world and he advocates for abortion and now medical assistance in dying. So I will say this, and we've seen this before in history, when a group of people are dehumanized, it opens the door for mistreatment, cruelty, and the rationalization of evil. You can see this with slavery, with the Holocaust. You can see this in Rwanda. And now we're seeing this with abortion. As soon as a group of people is dehumanized, it's easy to rationalize the evil things that are done to them. So that's kind of the basis. The whole crux is, yeah, you're ending a life, and it's a human life, but it's not a person. So that's the rationale. So we've all heard my body, my choice, that one we're very familiar with. So the basis of the bodily autonomy argument is that if women are to be equal to men, they need to be able to control their reproductive choices, including the right to an abortion. The thing is, women are not honorary men. And when we use controlling our reproduction to be equal to men, what we're really doing is we're saying men are the gold standard is what we need to achieve, which is kind of exactly contrary to the whole point of feminism where, you want to equal, but different in a way, right? So a baby also, we know that a baby is a separate body from his or her mothers as well. So first of all, we're not honorary men, and it's not our body. The baby's in our body, but it's not our body. So let's talk about choice. A couple, conception, we all know, is a natural result of a sex act. We all know that if we have sex, we can potentially get pregnant. Women know that, right? And what's happening now in our culture is that it's being viewed as a punishment. A pregnancy is a punishment for having sex, or a baby's the enemy. And that's how the whole thing is being framed. And yet we all know that that is just a totally natural thing if you're going to have sex. So a couple has a choice whether to engage in sex, knowing it can result in pregnancy. But if pregnancy occurs, there's a moral obligation from both parents to protect the human life. That was a natural choice, the result to have sex. And obviously, we're not talking about rape in this situation because that is not consensual sex. Further, I wanted to talk a little bit here about abortion and men. So when you talk about my body, my choice, you're cutting men out of the conversation. So this is leading to two outcomes. Men who want their babies to be born, but they have no say. And we've dealt with many men in that situation where, their girlfriend, even 20 years ago, had an abortion behind their back. And there's a lot of mental illness and trauma that can be associated with that. So that is the one part of it. But far, far more common is men who want to have sex without consequences. So men can say they support a woman's right to choose when the reality is they support their own sexual freedom. And if you think about it, it falls on women to be responsible for fertility and birth control. So 90% of women are the ones who are getting birth control. They have to manage generally hormonal birth control. They have to go to a doctor's appointment. They have to get a prescription. It can wreak havoc on their bodies. They have to go back to, the doctor, etc. Really, a guy can go pick up a condom at anywhere. And that's just quickly go pick that up. And yet that's not what's happening. It is all falling on women for the most part. Only 20% of men statistically use use condoms. So it's very convenient for guys to say, yeah, we support a woman's right to choose. It lets them off the hook. And the other thing, if you think about it, a woman can get pregnant 24 to 48 hours a month, maybe. She's fertile just a couple of days a month, if that. A man is fertile every single day of the year. If he's sleeping around, he can have numerous babies on the go. And we do have a promiscuous hookup culture. So a man can literally have more than one baby on the go at the same time. He needs abortion. Promiscuous men need abortion because otherwise they're going to have a lot more kids, right? So the whole contemporary sex culture that we live in is really damaging to the pro-life movement, right? Because more pregnancies, unwanted pregnancies, especially if a man's impregnating more than one woman, they want a way out. So while abortion is a main pillar of feminism, it's actually patriarchy disguised as feminism. So, I'm a feminist in the way that I believe in the equality of men and women. But when you look at in terms of the oppression of women, we say that abortion allows freedom. But really, it's giving men what they wanted all along, which is, and I use that term generally, like culturally, sex without consequences. So abortion as mercy. So here you see a picture of the Canadian Paralympic team, and they are super inspiring. I've heard interviews with a few of these people. They have overcome a lot of odds and now are performing at the top of their profession, as it were. But according to the abortion movement, if they've been diagnosed in utero, they'd be encouraged to be aborted, right? Like there'd be pressure for them to be aborted. So if there's a chance the baby would suffer from disability, poverty, or foster care, that is a legitimate reason to abort. So on the one hand, we'd celebrate people who have risen out of difficult circumstances. We encourage inclusion, and accessibility. And then on the other hand, we're saying people in these circumstances should be aborted, and further now, as they're adults, to choose medical assistance in dying, but I'll get that later. So I venture to say that most of us wouldn't be here if we applied this to our own lineage, right? We wouldn't have to go back too far, to have ancestors who lived in poverty or had difficult circumstances, right? So we're applying logic today that presumably would have prevented most of us from being born if it had, been applied, years ago. So in many countries, if prenatal screening indicates that there is even a chance of something wrong with the baby, mothers are encouraged to abort. I was speaking in Vancouver in January, and a nurse came up to me and she said the hospital she works at had done 2 late-term abortions the week prior. And she said one of the abortions was because the baby had a cleft palate. So this is a full-term pregnancy. And then they realized the baby had a cleft palate and the baby was aborted because of that. So this stuff is happening. But what's interesting, she said, it was so traumatic for the staff. So she said, you have these nurses who they're pro-choice and they were just sickened by this, right? So after it had been done, they had to have like a session with all the nurses. They had to bring in an outside counselor. There's this video, and I've dozens of these saved. I'll just show you one. This video is on TikTok, and it's from a girl who regrets her abortion. She says, things I learned were hard after thinking an abortion would be easy. Despite family support, this was the most isolated and lonely I'd ever felt. Fear of how this will haunt me when I become a mom. How painful the procedure was and always having flashbacks. Being torn between my head and my heart. The pressure I put on myself for a career now. Constantly wondering who you would have been. The daily what ifs. Okay, so when I downloaded this like 2 or 3 months ago, at that time, there was already 4,600 comments on that one video. And these are the comments. People really don't understand the pain and guilt felt after you go through this. I cried watching this. You're not alone. Thank you for making me feel less alone. 5 years since mine, and I still grieve something that I 100% know I didn't want at the time. I had one 4.5 years ago. The postpartum depression, the grief, the trauma, it doesn't go away, but it gets easier. I can relate to this. I had an abortion, didn't tell anyone for a year. If you need someone I'm here. I wish there's someone to talk to about it. Like, it's just like literally you scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. And this is just one post. And I found like on TikTok, these young girls are far more willing to talk about their regret and their concern. Women my age who are coming out of the sexual revolution and who are like, we've been told you support abortion. That is your duty as a woman. And they're not even the women my age who have so much post-abortion regret, they don't even talk about it because they feel responsible to toe the line, right? And they don't even feel safe talking about it because it wasn't supposed to be a big deal. And then they're surprised when it's a big deal. And that's the kind of thing I'm seeing. There's something on Twitter called Shout Your Abortion. So it's supposed to destigmatize abortion, right? Like, go on here, shout your abortion. It's no big deal. And I just wanted to read, there's tons of these types of posts too, but I just wanted to read a couple of them as well. So these are two separate women here who've had abortions, and they write this. Up until the pregnancy passed, I was very pragmatic and detached from the entire situation. I approached it in a very emotionless and clinical way. Nobody warned me about the grief and loss I would feel afterwards. I've cried every day since, and it's so confusing and overwhelming. I have no regrets whatsoever. I don't feel guilty because I truly believe people are entitled to decide what happens to their body, but I thought all I would feel is relief, but I feel sadness too, trying to make sense of the feelings, etc. I still cry when I think of this. Almost 6 years later, I've coped this long by not thinking about it. I never got to grieve in the way I would have liked to be able to. I experienced so much fear as well as physical, psychological, and emotional distress. My heart aches for my decision, etc. And then here she goes, I stand by my choice. I cannot imagine my life in any other direction, and I would not want to. This is over and over, all this grief and loss and pain, but I stand by my decision. It's really this cognitive dissonance, right? Where it's like they're not even, so many women don't even feel allowed to feel what they're feeling. They're surprised when they feel grief. And I notice that in our office as well, right? It's no big deal, just a medical procedure. And then this happens and they don't know what to make of it. So unexpected pregnancy is really scary. Like, it is scary. And I've noticed, like, particularly financially, people are panicking about the financial thing. They can't even make a clear decision because they're so concerned, how are we going to pay for this? Or what do we do? We can't afford another baby. So that's a big part of it. But the other thing I would notice, and I would say almost 100% of the women who come into our office would keep the baby if somebody supported them, if the father was supportive, if the parents were supportive. And so we say, oh, my body, my choice. But studies show that 74% of post-abortive women admitted that their decision was not free from even subtle pressure from others to abort. So while it's being framed as a woman's choice, they're facing so much external pressure to do it. And I've seen that over and over again. What's interesting, this is a new one that's come up this fall or this spring from numerous women. I've actually started getting messages and calls from women, and they've been saying, like, my mom had abortions, like my siblings were aborted, and I don't know how to forgive my mom. Like, I'm an only child, and she had 2 abortions, whatever, before or after me. And like, I'm so angry at my mom. I hear those types of stories regularly now, right? It just doesn't impact the woman alone. It impacts other people as well. What's interesting, I don't know if I have the slide here. There's just a study that came out in January by Cartus Research in Canada, and it actually showed nearly half of Canadian women wish they had more children. So they put, fertility on hold. They put having families on hold till they're starting do their schooling, their career, get financially set up. And then by the time they're ready to have kids, they have maybe 1, maybe 2, and they regret not having more kids. But that's something you only kind of see more, when you're a little bit older, not necessarily when you're younger. So the issue is not that people regret having kids, is now finding more people regret not having kids. So why is this happening? So I believe there are a few key factors here. The sexual revolution, the rise of the material worldview, and personal autonomy. So the sexual revolution in the 60s, it seems like a long time ago, but we're really feeling the outcome of that now. So it was a social movement that challenged traditional codes of sexual behavior, essentially giving women the green light to have casual sex, which of course led to an increase in unwanted pregnancies. Casual sex has just caused this extraordinary amount of pain for women. What's interesting as well is in terms of pregnancy, marital status, pregnancy and abortion, marital status makes a big difference. So in 2020, this is in the US, there were 41 abortions per 100 live births among unmarried women. 40 goes down to 5 for married women. So that makes a big difference if you're married or not married in terms of pregnancy. The material worldview, well, materialism refers to the theory that physical matter is all there is. It states that everything in the universe is matter without any true spiritual or intellectual existence. So it is no surprise that abortion is viewed as just a surgical procedure with no regard for the baby's inherent value. However, as Christians, we know that God exists and life is of infinite value from the moment of conception. Having said that, there are secular pro-life groups that are doing incredible work. I know numerous atheists that are really passionate pro-lifers. They have sound scientific and philosophical arguments for why abortion is wrong. And I think we also need to acknowledge that, because sometimes as Christians, we act like, we're the only ones who would support life. That's not necessarily true. And personal autonomy. I talked about my body, my choice, and that really is personal autonomy, but that really came out of the being equal to men. Personal autonomy in general is a little more broad. It talks about a person's sense of self-determination. I think this is something we all agree with for the most part. However, we know that there are limits to what we can and should do, which is why we have laws. Otherwise, why would we even need laws or government? So when it comes to personal autonomy and abortion, framing abortion is just this matter of personal autonomy. It really ignores legitimate ethical questions. For example, the value of the unborn. It impacts more than the person making the decision, and it reduces care, resources, and supports. So if you look at impacting more than the person making the decision, I already talked about like how it impacts siblings. It impacts community. It impacts more than just the woman, abortion. But what people, I don't think see is that it reduces care, resources, and support in the system. So if a woman gets a prenatal diagnosis that their baby has Down syndrome, they're expected to abort. They're given very little information about what it would be like to have a child with Down syndrome, or if a baby's diagnosed and is going to die after birth. The assumption is made that there should be an abortion, and women are often pressured in the moment to make that abortion appointment. I'm just going to give you an example. So a woman, one of our volunteers, actually, she had a baby who was diagnosed with anencephaly, and that is when the brain and skull are not developed. So the baby will have like half a brain and skull. She was pressured to abort, and she said, "No, I'm delivering this baby." So she delivered the baby. He lived for 6 days. They got to bring him home. They got to hold him, cuddle him, nurture him for 6 days. He passed. Their church had a funeral. There's 200-300 people came out to honor the life of this little guy. It was very beautiful, very healing. At our Angel Baby Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support last year, we had a woman. She came and she was beside herself. She was pacing. She was like pulling at her hair. She was just like a total mess, honestly. And so we're trying to ask her, like, well, the facilitator's asking her what's going on. So our group runs on a Tuesday. 2 weeks ago, prior, she'd gone to just a routine. She was 4 months along. She'd gone to a routine appointment, and they said, your baby has anencephaly. They scheduled an abortion appointment before she just found this out. They scheduled an abortion appointment. 2 days later, she had an abortion on the Thursday. So now she's at our group about 10 days later. And she was a mess. She didn't have time to think about it. She's grieving the fact that her baby is going to die, but now she actually is the one who ended up signing off and the baby, on the abortion. Okay, so it was, everybody in that room was traumatized already because it was so intense. But I look at that and I think, what's more dignifying to the woman and to the baby? The first case where, yeah, the baby's going to die, but this life still has value. This life still has value. So she carries the baby. There's a funeral. People are reaching out. There's a community supporting. Versus now this woman who's pressured to 2 days later abort, and now she's living with all this trauma, right? It's very clear what's the better way to go for both the baby and for the woman. So I think framing abortion is just like personal autonomy, just grossly oversimplifies legitimate concerns. So as you can see, abortion ends the life of a baby and it is harmful to women. It should not be controversial to support life. Like, people are so scared to support life. Are you kidding me? Every life has value. That's not controversial. That's beautiful. All human beings have moral worth and value from the womb until natural death. And now I'm going to talk about medical assistance in dying. You know, we used to just address the abortion side, but now that MAID has been legalized, it's important that we address this because it's kind of the other side of the same coin in a way. This section is shorter, so you won't get quite as much information, but it's super important that we talk about this because this will be coming up in your churches, in your families as time goes on. So MAID is the Canadian legislation that allows physicians, nurse practitioners, and pharmacists to carry out euthanasia and assisted suicide. Assisted suicide is when, you know, you're given a prescription that you take by yourself. You're monitored, but you take the prescription and do it yourself. Euthanasia is the direct administration of a substance that causes death, and this is administered by a physician or a nurse practitioner. So when the criminal code was introduced in Canada in 1892, suicide and assisted suicide were considered criminal offenses. So while suicide was decriminalized in 1972, assisted suicide remained illegal. In June of 2016, assisted suicide was legalized in Canada as an exception to the criminal code. So MAID is an exception to the criminal code. The federal government passed Medical Assistance in Dying Act, which establishes the eligibility criteria and procedural safeguards for medically assisted suicide. So the way it was introduced in 2016 would be something that, you know, most people in our culture would support. Suffering, you're going to die in the next little while, right? It's just prematurely ending death. But in 2021, new legislation was passed, and that expanded eligibility for MAID. Your death didn't need to be foreseeable is the main one, right? So it opens it up for so many people now to choose it, and it's further going to be expanded in 2024 for mental illness. So in a few short years, Canada has become the most permissive country in the entire world with both abortion and MAID. We live here. It's just kind of normal to us what we're seeing, but this is not normal in other parts of the world. Between 2016 and 2021, over 31,000 Canadians chose to die by MAID. Waiting for the 2022 numbers. They're supposed to be out this month, but I haven't seen them yet. And these numbers are underreported because some people don't want MAID on their death certificates. So often on death certificates, they'll do the underlying cause like cancer or whatever it is and not say that it was medical assistance in dying. What's interesting in Canada, so you can pick assisted suicide where you self-administer or euthanasia where it's administered to you. This is in Ontario, and this is from the beginning of MAID in 2016. We did this analysis in October, so till the end of October 22. So in Ontario, of the 13,011 people that died by MAID, only 3 of them self-administered. So that's just a bit of an illusion. And it shows that people don't want to do the act themselves. For some reason, it sanitizes it when the doctor is giving you the injection versus if you're taking it yourself. So we talk about MAID, but really it's euthanasia in Canada. So why are people choosing MAID? Loss of ability to engage in meaningful activities, loss of ability to perform activities of daily living, inadequate control of pain or concern. This really is an invalid category because do you have inadequate control of pain, or are you concerned about inadequate control of pain? So those are 2 separate things that they lump into one. All of us are concerned about having uncontrollable pain. That doesn't mean we're in pain. So that's not really a great statistical question. Loss of dignity, inadequate control of symptoms other than pain, perceived burden on family and friends, loss of control of bodily functions, isolation or loneliness. So it's not primarily pain why people are choosing MAID. It's because of things like losing the ability to engage in meaningful activities, inability to perform daily activities. As you'll read in the news, poverty and housing are also playing an increasing role in choosing MAID. And as it turns out, it's losing the things that give life meaning that cause people to despair. Suffering mentally, emotionally, and spiritually are often more difficult for people to deal with than physical pain. Canada's MAID system is raising alarm bells around the world and is an example of how not to implement MAID. According to Scott Kim of the National Institute of Health in the US, Canada is the world's most radically medicalized system of providing assisted suicide. It pairs very open eligibility with aggressive medical delivery. Why is this? Canada is the only jurisdiction that I know of. Well, there's kind of two reasons. The main one is that in Canada, MAID can be presented as a treatment option. In other parts of the world, the patient has to initiate the conversation, right? Like, I'd like to do this. So, you know, who wants to say to your doctor, I'd like to kill myself or whatever, or however they would say it. In Canada, it's like, if you get diagnosed, okay, well, we can do chemo, we can do nothing, or we can do MAID. And it's just presented like it's kind of this almost morally neutral, objective decision that you need to make. So when it's presented like that, the more people are inclined to choose it. The other thing, in most jurisdictions, it is literally assisted suicide where patients have to take it themselves and not euthanasia. So that's another thing that's contributing to being more accessible or being so popular in Canada. MAID removes the moral or the ethical and moral responsibility society has to take care of the aging and vulnerable under the pretext of compassion and personal liberty, when in fact MAID is a deliberate strategy by the government to save on healthcare costs in an unsustainable universal healthcare system. Government doesn't even deny this. The parliamentary budget officer talks about, like, they have a line item, how much they're saving by using medical assistance in dying, because medical costs go up as we get older. So our culture increasingly believes that it is better for people to die rather than to face any kind of suffering or potential suffering. People are increasingly being told that MAID is a legitimate treatment option, even when their death is not foreseeable. I had a 38-year-old woman call me in January, 38, visually impaired. She's going to be paneled for MAID. And I was like, what? And she said, yeah, like she's done. And I messaged her. I said, like, what's going on? And she said, well, she doesn't feel safe in her apartment. She's in downtown Winnipeg. She's isolated. She's lonely. So we ended up helping her move to a new place in Winnipeg. Literally, we spent about $1,000. That's it, to help her move to a new location in Winnipeg. We got 2 of our volunteers to email her once a week. That's it. 2 people emailing her once a week. She sends me emails almost every month saying, thank you so much for saving my life. She, like, I'm in a great location now. It's by the grocery store. I can go to access the bus. Now she's like trying to write letters, like she's been writing letters to school boards saying discrimination's a problem in school or bullying is, that type of thing. She's 38 years old, going to choose MAID because of her visual impairment. And now it's a few months later and she's like, her life is full again, and she would qualify. It's ridiculous. It's actually ridiculous. Or you hear these stories of veterans in the news who, you know, they serve our country and they're struggling. And then the people who are supposed to help them are saying, well, have you considered MAID? It's really gone way, way, way too far. So further, as the rate and rationale for MAID expand, at what point will the right to die turn into the obligation to die? Will somebody be encouraged to die by MAID to free up a hospital bed to somebody who has a better chance of survival? Or donate their organs to somebody whose life is deemed more valuable? So globally, when it comes to organ donation through medical assistance in dying, globally, Canadian organs make up 50% of all organs donated globally through medical assistance in dying. So what about this scenario? You know, if you choose MAID now, you can save 13 people with your organs, right? And presenting it even as this altruistic kind of thing. You're doing a good thing if you choose MAIDs, and we can help other people live. These scenarios are not far-fetched, not at all, not at the rate things are going here. So as with abortion, Canada is now the least restrictive country in the world when it comes to euthanasia. To put this into perspective, I'm going to compare us to California. Assisted suicide was approved in California in 2016, same year as Canada. Their population, 38 to 39 million, same with Canada, 38 to 39 million. In 2021, 486 people in California died by MAID. In Canada, 10,064 people died by MAID. So you can just see how, like, it's out of control. And again, in California, I believe it is self-administered, and your death has to be foreseeable, and you have to have intense suffering. But you can just see, as we're loosening the parameters, more people are choosing to go this way. Okay, I won't get too much into this. Why is this happening? Well, the material worldview, I talked about that. Christians are also choosing made, maybe at a lesser rate. So it's not solely the material worldview, but the material worldview where, our lives don't have any significant or inherent meaning beyond what's on this earth definitely plays a role in it. Universal healthcare, of course, saves a lot of money if people die by maid. And again, personal autonomy. People can do what they want to do. But isn't that just turning into this great excuse for us not to care about people? Like you do you choose what you're going to do. We're not going to infringe on your personal autonomy. Like our culture is just using that as a scapegoat, not even to care about people anymore. We don't want to infringe on their right to do whatever they want to do. And that's totally what we're seeing. The other piece is, again, it's not just about the person choosing. I hear countless stories from family members who didn't even know their parent or their sibling was going to choose maid, and they found out after the fact. It's not just the person who's choosing it who's impacted, it's the family, it's the children. And it's also impacting the level of care in our healthcare system, because now people aren't given all their options, because this is the cheapest, this is the most convenient. So it doesn't just impact the person, it impacts our whole culture. So when we frame these things as personal autonomy, it's just really a gross injustice to us all. The fact is, aging, getting sick, these things, dying, the odds are not in our favor. We're 100% going to die. And we're acting like this isn't this natural process that we need to go through. So we need to totally change our perspective now, again, on what it means to age and die and care for people as they get older, right? Okay, so now I'm just going to go through what we can do. So I'm going to start with what we can do more as individuals, as Christians, what we can do to support a culture of life, just in our own day-to-day lives. And then I have one slide at the end, how churches can, implement more of a culture of life. So both abortion and maid are incompatible with Christianity. God is a God of life. He gives life. He values life. The fact is, we've begun to let culture influence the church in these areas instead of the church influencing the culture. I think back, I'm no theologian or scholar, but if we look back to Bible times, I read some books on church history, and a catalyst for the church was how Christian cared for women, children, elderly, the disabled, literally the same people that we are targeting, our culture is targeting now for death, are the same people that were discarded during the Roman Empire. And Christians came in there and they cared for people, right? And that is literally was a catalyst for the growth of the church. And so we need to be more equipped in these areas as the church and as Christians. So the Bible tells us to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. Early Christians followed this mandate, and it changed the course of history. So valuing babies, women, the sick, the vulnerable is what attracted people to Christianity. And what if the very thing our churches are silent about now with these areas is the very thing that could revive our churches? Addressing abortion and maid are huge opportunities for the church and for Christians. We have a massive opportunity to put our faith into action by caring for the vulnerable, whether it's all the ones I've mentioned, women, post-abortive women, babies, other people who are vulnerable. So ways you can live a pro-life ethic. It sounds basic, but this is literally what I tell people when they ask me. Number one, care for others. I mentioned that a little bit with the personal autonomy. We don't care anymore. We need to care about women, care about babies, the elderly, the sick, care about post-abortive women. Don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong, hold tightly to what is good. Take delight in honoring each other and love each other with genuine affection. I got that mixed up, but still. Point remains, people aren't projects. I think sometimes we view people, okay, now I'm going to help this person who's struggling. I'm going to help them. But people aren't projects. I know even in parenting, I know when I once read love each other with genuine affection. And I was thinking about it as a mom. Yeah, I love my kids. Obviously, I love my kids. I love them more than anything. But do I love them with genuine affection? And it's a difference. Loving people is different than loving people with affection. If you love people with affection, that's a whole different level for them. And I think we need to start viewing the people among us as well. How do we love them well? And how do we love them with genuine affection? Second thing I want to talk about is reaching one person. So Joseph Stalin said that the death of one person is a tragedy. The death of 1 million is a statistic. Mother Teresa said, if I look at the mass, I will never act. So two people, they understood the same concept, but used it for very, Stalin used it for diabolical purposes. Mother Teresa used it for good. And the whole point of this is that, we get overwhelmed when we see the large numbers. We see 100,000 people and babies in Canada, 73 million in the world. What can I even do? And I think this is exacerbated by our social media culture, where it's like, we want lots of views, we want lots of followers, we want lots of likes. We've really lost value of sight of what it means to reach the one person. But the one person matters. Luke 15, there's a parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the lost son. The Bible talks about one person mattering. And I think it's really important. We can't all reach everybody, but we can all reach one person. Okay, third, respecting those with different perspectives. Okay, one thing, there's lots of one things here. Another thing has really been impressed upon me. I feel God's been impressing upon me is we as Christians, we're foreigners on the earth. Sometimes, we walk this earth and we want people to do things our way. We know how it should be done. But the reality is we're the foreigners here. We're in foreign territory. The earth as it is now is not our home. So when we're foreigners, if we go to a new country, start a new job, wherever we're in a situation, we're new to something, you don't go in there with guns blazing and say, okay, let's do things our way. Like, you need to do things my way or our way. The vast majority of people will be like, what are you talking about? This is our territory. You're in our place now. And I think we need to approach, how we operate in this world with a little bit more of that perspective. Engaging with conversations with people, being more nuanced, finding out where we can have influence, even if it can't be done all our way. This verse, I think, is so important. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The area I work in is a very polarizing and can be a very challenging area, pro-life work. But I have found the vast majority of people who are pro-choice are totally willing to engage in a reasonable conversation and hear about it. Yeah, we see the activists. I know there's extremes. We see extremes. Those are the ones who get all the attention. But on a day-to-day basis, most people are totally willing to have a conversation about this. You can't make them the enemy. We're supposed to love people who have a different perspective. We're supposed to love the enemy. And we need to approach people to some far more gracious and engaging manner on this topic. Because again, most people know nothing about it other than that they're supposed to support it. And so I just think as Christians, we need to be more respectful and, try and engage in nice conversations with people. And people are actually looking for those conversations. So equip yourself. It is much easier to be confident and wise when you have knowledge. So you will have more after this presentation than you did before. And celebrate incremental gains. Sometimes we are all or nothing, and that's just not going to work in this area. I think we have to be like, we're the 8%. We're in the minority. We have to look where we can have incremental gains and not approach it as like all or nothing, because saving some lives is better than saving no lives. And then a quick slide. What can churches do to support life? Put a sanctity of life statement in your statement of faith. You'd be surprised how few churches actually have that. Talk to your staff and volunteers and commit to an annual day of life, or make it a part of hiring practices. That's one thing I noticed last year after Roe v. Wade is when pastors would call and say, "Are youth pastors pro-choice?" I'm like, well, did you ask them in the interview? Well, no, they just assumed. I don't think we can assume those things anymore. And when it comes to an annual day of life, I'm not saying you need to do a big abortion presentation every year, But every year, like depending on where your church is at, you can do a sanctity of life message. You can talk about medical assistance in dying. You can talk about caring for others. So those are some things I think churches can do just to begin to now place more importance on life. The future of the pro-life movement is individuals, churches, and small groups changing hearts one at a time, ordinary people making a difference in creating a culture of life. This is going to take a grassroots approach, because from the political side, I can't see a time in the near future where anything would be changed, but that doesn't mean we can't, make some impact from the grassroots level. So I just wanted to close with reading this looks really intimidating, but this is actually the MB conference. They have just this beautiful statement of life that a friend of mine goes to the MB church, and he had sent me this, and I just think it's so beautiful and encapsulates exactly, what a pro-life ethic in a church should look like, and for Christians. So we believe that all human life belongs to God. Each person is created in the image of God and ought to be celebrated and nurtured. Because God is creator, the author and giver of life, we oppose all actions and attitudes which devalue human life. The unborn, disabled, poor, aging, and dying are particularly vulnerable to such injustices. Christ calls the people of all nations to care for the defenseless. God values human life highly. Ultimate decisions regarding life and death belong to God. Therefore, we hold that procedures designed to take life, including abortion, euthanasia, and assisted suicide, are an affront to God's sovereignty. We esteem the life-sustaining findings of medical science, but recognize that there are limits to the value of seeking to sustain life indefinitely. In all complex ethical decisions regarding life and death, we seek to offer hope and healing, support and counsel in the context of Christian community. So I want to thank you so much for coming to this session. We're going to have a Q&A now for those of you, if you have any questions you'd like to ask. I know that was a lot of information in an hour, I guess 75 minutes. But yeah, if there's any questions or discussion you'd like to have, then go ahead. Okay. So the question was, basically my thoughts on what's happening in the US with abortion politics. Essentially. Well, first of all, the system in the US is very different because abortion is privatized. It's not public health care. So it's private people, organizations making money for profit, abortion for profit. So Planned Parenthood makes billions of dollars off abortion, or whichever other provider. So it's different because it's a profit, it's a moneymaker for private business. Whereas in Canada, it's just a part of the public health care system. So that is just a dramatically different approach to it. So I know we're really influenced by the US, but it's really hard to compare it just because the delivery of it is so different. Politically, I mean, if you look at the US, there's different perspectives on that because traditionally the pro-life movement, Republicans are supposed to be pro-life. However, the Republicans offer less social programs, right? So some people would say, fine, you're pro-life until birth, but after birth, you don't really care. And then you look at the Democrats who would say, support a woman's right to choose, but they offer more social programs. So some people argue, well, actually, the Democrats are more pro-life because there's more social programs they provide to help women and children after they're born. So it's a really complicated system. What's happening in the States, the way the pro-life movement works and the progress they've made, again, it's just not going to work the same way in Canada. And I believe primarily it's public health care here. It's really hard to, it's not for profit, right? What's interesting is, and I don't want to be too, just always complain about our government, because the fact is in Canada, universal health care, for all its flaws, it's helpful to women who are in poor economic circumstances. Child tax benefit, that's a huge thing. They don't have that in the US. We have, paid maternity leave, 12 to 18 months. So to just always rail against the government, I don't think is the right approach. Canada does, and governments really, for all their flaws, they are trying to help life. They just have different perspectives on how to do that. Like they would say abortion's compassion and helping life, or MAID is compassion. So I want to be careful how we do that. And Canada does have actually a lot of good pro-life policies that they're advocating for in the States, like paid maternity leave, child tax benefits. So I think we want to have a little more wisdom and understanding when we deal with this. And I don't think we want to just always attack the government, because we want to work with the government to improve incremental gains. And if we're always constantly railing against them, I think it's going to make it a lot harder for us to work with them.
Okay, if you can come to the mic, that way the person online can hear. We got a bit of length here.
I feel so confrontational now. First of all, thank you so much for this presentation. Talk about bringing you to some churches in Ontario. You talked about support in the medical profession being a mile wide and an inch deep. Why does this keep happening? I'd say the same thing is happening now in the so-called realm of gender affirming care. You'll find that doctors, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, pediatricians appear to be supportive of it, but in private are not supportive of it. So why does this keep happening in these medical realms?
I just think there's this mob mentality that develops with whatever it is, and the mob doesn't even necessarily know what it's fighting for. I think, again, the internet, social media is just allowing, a mob to develop. There's a book called The Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols. And if you read that book, what it talks about is how, like, now with social media, everybody's an expert. You put out a tweet and people think from somebody who knows nothing about something, and that gets equal weight to somebody who has lots of knowledge about something. So I think there's this, we've lost an understanding of what it means to have expertise, and we've lost respect for people who actually do have expertise. And you know what, at the end of the day, doctors, medical professionals, they're human. They're human, and to be kept for a mob to go after you, these mobs that develop online and cancel you, people are losing their jobs for speaking up. Like, well, they've got kids at home. It's not like they're trying to hide these things, but they don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to lose their incomes. So I really think that has a lot to do with it. It's this fear of the mob, and it just shows also how imperative it is for people to have a support network around them. Like, even for the work I do, like, I have to have close people around me who I know believe in what I'm doing and are with me no matter what happens. A lot of people don't have that, and nobody wants their face on the newspaper and going viral on the internet. So I just think it's just this mob mentality and this lack of education and not respecting people who actually do have expertise and feelings over fact, right? So it seems pretty simple, but it's complicated to resolve, for sure.
I just have a question regarding life beyond abortion and MAID and so on. I'm wondering how you're from Steinbach, I'm from Winkler. You have some political involvement in council. I imagine you've had some similar dynamics in your communities to ours. Why is it, or how do you reconcile that those who would be the staunchest supporters of, I don't call it pro-life, I call it anti-abortion, signs, placards, demonstrations, and all, when it comes to something life-preserving, such as pandemic, restrictions, prevention, life-preserving for fellow man, they'll rail against it. Like how and the leaders are the Christians. When other faiths say, well, that's a no-brainer. We're going to protect our fellow man. But as Christians, particularly the evangelical Christians, we rail against that. Like how is, we say we're pro-life, but we're not. Or how do you reconcile that?
Not at all loaded.
Gee, thanks for that. Yeah. Yeah, turn it all off. I'm not going to address specifically like pandemic or even abortion with this one. What I have noticed in evangelical culture, and this is just my 2 cents, is that we've just been ingrained that we need to take a stand like almost creating enemies or creating a battle that we need to take a stand. It could be any issue, right? We need to take a stand. I personally would, let's quit creating enemies. And if we do have these enemies, we're supposed to love our enemies. And I think we're just way more scared than we need to be about the other. Most people are just living their lives. Let's get in there and see where we can influence and be positive. The pandemic was interesting to me. Well, I about said I wasn't going to talk about it, but I am, because, you know, churches are taking a stand, but it wasn't a faith issue, like, you know, take this, or, you know, or it didn't involve faith, I didn't believe, from the medical perspective. So we're taking a stand against something. It's not like, and I don't care if people got vaccinated or not, each to their own. I know that's people who are unvaccinated felt like, you know, they were being pressured, but it wasn't take this or because of your faith, or do you deny Christ, or it wasn't a religious thing. So I found it interesting that it was turned into a religious thing. Because from my perspective, you can make a case for wanting your freedom not to vaccinate, but I still didn't view it as a religious choice that people were making. And some people can disagree with me, but overall, it comes just with evangelicalism. I feel like we're making enemies. Take a stand. Take a stand. And we're taking about stands about things that are maybe going to, you know, when the time comes that we really do need to take a stand, it's almost like crying wolf. Will you take a stand against everything? Why is this one now also the legitimate one? So I just think we need to quit creating enemies instead of always taking a stand. We need to view like, okay, how can we influence our culture? We're the foreigners here. When we're taking a stand, we're demanding a secular, pluralistic culture do things our way. We are in a secular, pluralistic culture. That means there's going to be others with different perspectives and views. And if we believe we're the right ones, let's build relationships, get involved in places where we think we can influence, instead of this business of like, hey, now we're going to dig in our heels and take a stand against something that most people really aren't even really like, what are you doing? This isn't even a religious issue. So I don't know if that really answers it, but I just think we need to all chill a little bit and rather work on building relationships instead of just digging in our heels all the time.
So is Life Culture, like your organization, are you invited or welcomed into schools and other organizations, or how can you promote even this education? It's super helpful.
Well, so I started January 2021. So the first like 15 months was restrictions. So a year ago when things opened up, I really had no idea what to expect. Honestly, it was really tough to connect with churches and pastors, brutal, until Roe v. Wade was overturned. And that definitely started opening doors. I mean, we could go to some Christian colleges, like some churches, others don't want to. It's really hit or miss. Like we'll go where we're invited. We also try and, you know, connect with people too. Like we primarily would like do pastors' lunches or something where they can come to us and we'll educate. Welcomed into the public school, not so much. Like again, our culture views this very much as, you know, a woman's issue. If you don't support it, you're anti-woman. So it's tough, but we are definitely being able to have more and more conversations. We just had the Walk for Life in Steinbach last week. In spite of the blazing heat, we had 700 people out, which is good. And it would have been way more if it hadn't been so hot. People just like, they're interested in how we're doing things, right? Like they want to talk about this subject. It's just, they've never felt safe to talk about it with pro-choice people. Cause it's like, their questions aren't respected, or, people want to be respected and have a safe place to talk about it. So that's what we're trying to do. And also educate, like nobody knows most of this information. So yeah, we haven't done too much of that yet. We're looking into now expanding into that, doing more like that. We're 100% donor because we're anti-woman. We don't get government funding because we're pro-life. So So yeah, so we don't qualify for grants, and even most foundations don't want to. And it's not because they don't necessarily support what we're doing. It's just if the wrong person finds out, then, they don't want to be canceled, like we talked about right before.
I noticed how you framed the Walk for Life in terms of it not being a protest. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, first of all, maybe I'll go back just a little bit. We funded something called a Hope's Cradle, which is a safe surrender site for infants, for moms who I shouldn't say that, for moms who need to abandon their babies. So it's set up the Landmark, Manitoba, their fire station. So if a mom has a baby that she needs to abandon for whatever reason, maybe she's being trafficked, maybe she's a teen girl who's scared, it's a safe surrender site. So when we had the grand opening for that in February, we had MP, MLA, and mayor all attended. After that, we were invited to the ledge where all parties gave us a standing ovation. And it just really impacted me again as how, we can do pro-life things without labeling them pro-life. And we can do pro-life initiatives without, in ways that anybody can support. So that's really the approach we've been trying to take. So when it came to the Walk for Life, traditionally walks are done on the steps of the ledge or Parliament. And again, I don't see it right now for me at this point, that just seems like a waste of resources to a certain degree. There is no political will to do anything in this area. So why are we, I'm not, there's other groups doing that, which is fine, but we don't need to repeat what we're doing. We need to do something different. We want to reach that 41% who don't know where they are. So this year for the walk, what we did is a celebration of life, more of a festival feel, actually, music, face painting, balloons. And what we did for the first time this year is we said, bring a baby item, bring a box of diapers, bring something. So, because, the pro-life movement gets accused, you just care about birth, you don't care about women, etc. And we just collected tons of people brought a box of diapers or brought sleepers or that type of thing. So we framed it more as this baby shower. And then now we have all these items, and we're going to distribute them to pro-life. Well, not pro-life necessarily, but to organizations that could use them and help women. So people really appreciate that approach because people are so sick and tired of confrontation and anger and outrage. And we're just trying, that's not a culture. Constant outrage is not a culture of life. Constant anger is not a culture of life. We're not just going to be angry all the time. We actually want to do something tangible and helpful. And that's how we approach the walk. Didn't talk about the government once at the walk. We're talking about how can we impact our culture for life? It's so easy just to always, the government needs to do this, the government needs to do that. No, actually, we probably need less government. So how about we step in and fill some of those areas that we always want to look to the government to do.
Sure how strongly you meant this before when you said, when you have a medical diagnosis, you say you can have treatment or you can have death. Well, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. There was not even a hint of death. It was we're going for the cure. The hope that I felt from the medical, both locally and from Winnipeg, was great. Another example is my father lived to be 101. He was going for medical treatments quite regularly, taken in my ambulance to Winnipeg, back. And so my brother asked the doctors there one day, how long do we do this? She says, as long as there's quality of life, we keep doing. So very, very supportive and not a hint of, you don't count anymore, so, and we've had, many experiences like that. So it's not all that way. It probably depends on personalities, but there's lots of hope out there too.
Yes, certainly I would say hospital to hospital, region to region, hear all sorts of stories. I'm so happy for your experience. Lots of places that's not happening, but certainly you would get both based on the doctor, based on the philosophy of the regional health authority. So I think it's going to vary wherever you are. What's interesting when Calvin Goertzen was health minister, he implemented conscience rights protections for healthcare professionals in 2016 in Manitoba. And both parties supported that. This was right when MAID was getting legalized. And Manitoba is literally the only province in Canada that has that. And I haven't seen the numbers for 2022, but I've heard rumors that MAID numbers actually went down in Manitoba, even while they were going up around the country. So it's certainly, I feel like Manitoba government, the philosophy is much more helpful than it is, you know, like you said, they're offering hope and help. It is, again, it does, like I talk to lots of medical professionals, and it's definitely not like this everywhere. There's situations where once the family leaves the room from a patient, the MAID team comes in, like, what do you want? Do you want death? Like there's certain hospitals where there are teams that do this, and they are literally, you know, trying to do it, or finding patients to do it. But you're right. It's not every situation would be like that. Well, MAID is publicly funded healthcare. Yeah, that's just a part of our healthcare system now. Yeah, so you are funding it. Mhm.
It was pushed on them 5 or 6 times. They would try when she was there, when she was not
Yeah.
there. Medicaid.
It's very interesting. A woman came up to me and she said to me, her father had a relatively routine procedure, and he was in the hospital for 3 weeks, and he was supposed to be there for 3 days. And they couldn't get his anxiety and his blood pressure down, and they could not figure out what was going on. So finally, he told her, because he'd been hallucinating coming out of his operation, and he thought he'd given them permission for MAID. So every time a nurse was coming, or doctor was coming into the room, or anytime a nurse was coming to do something with his IV, he thought maybe they were, you know, doing euthanizing him. And once they found this out, then they were like, oh, no, that did not happen. You must have been hallucinating. No papers have been signed. You're safe. You're not going to be euthanized. And he was like literally discharged the next day. So like, think of even that for people now, they're scared. They're going to be euthanized without their own permission, right?
Any other comments or questions? I just want to, first of all, say thank you, Susan. This has been a very good presentation. Really appreciate it. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was sitting in my office in Steinbach, and I got a random phone call. A lady from southeastern Manitoba, whom I didn't know, no connection to at all, and just sobbing. She had had an abortion, and now all the regret was washing over her. She married, a couple of kids, weren't thinking very much about it. As soon as I walked in the door, I knew it was wrong, carried through with it. And I, through text and phone calls and so on, over a period of time, tried to help her with her grief. Minimal faith. That was my first direct encounter with someone dealing with it. It just struck me. And how many more, right? So all of us can make a difference. So thank you so much. Yes. Yes, let's pray. Lord God, I want to thank you so much for Life Culture Canada and for the work that Susan and her associates are doing on our behalf. And we're very grateful for the work that they're doing. And Lord, I pray that your spirit would sustain them. They are working against something that Satan wants to have happen, and that's death. And so they're doing God's work, as all of us are doing. But I just thank you for her and her ministry. And I pray, Lord, that you would guide us as we do our best to support and do our best to have a culture of life wherever we are. And Lord, help us to love. In Jesus' name, amen.